Hello and welcome to the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center Something to Talk About program. We host these conversations a few times a week, and they are recorded for those of us who are not able to watch it at the time. So you can find them on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/BI Senior Center. And you can also see what programs are coming up by visiting biseniorcenter.org/calendar. Our Something to Talk About program is sponsored by the Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island. Fieldstone offers assisted and independent living along with a vibrant memory care community located on the tranquil Rolling Bay campus. They also include day stay and respite care programs. Call 206-594-1010. Email Ashley C at fieldstonecommunities.com. Check out their website at fieldstonecommunities.com, or stop by for a tour. We would also like to acknowledge that we meet on the ancestral homeland of the Suquamish people, the people of the clear salt water. The Suquamish have lived on the water of the Salish Sea since time immemorial. We honor them and are learning from their stewardship of these lands and waters. Today, we are meeting with Dana Binnendijk, Community Impact Officer for the Bainbridge Community Foundation, and also my dear friend. Dana is going to share BCF's State of the Sector report, which highlights vulnerabilities in our community and illustrates how nonprofits and BCF are working together on providing quality programs and services. And after the presentation, Dana will have some time to answer questions. So if you have anything, jot it down and we'll talk a little bit afterwards. Okay, without further ado, Dana, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to start by asking folks, I know a couple of you are pretty familiar with Bainbridge Community Foundation. Is there anybody who hasn't heard of us before on the line? I think most folks know. Okay, so I won't go too deep into our history, but I will talk a little bit about what we do just for a broad overview for folks who might be tuning in after the fact and might not know as much about us so far. So we have been officially in existence for the last, I guess it's 23 years now. We were sort of an idea back in the 1970s, and then in the 1990s became there was a trust committee formed from One Call for All, and they created the Bainbridge Community Endowment at that time. And fast forward, 2001, we became a 501c3, and here we are today as Bainbridge Community Foundation. And we do a variety of different activities. You can see here, I won't go through this chart in full, but there's sort of two ways we could summarize it. We support the nonprofit community by providing education. So that's like training or mini courses that might help support knowledge and learning in the nonprofit sector. We provide funding through our grant making and peer support for nonprofits. So we try to be a gathering space for folks in the nonprofit community to meet each other and learn from each other in groups here. We also support the donor community by providing education on the island's greatest needs. So we'll hear about that a little bit today, as well as try to provide different giving vehicles that allow donors to fulfill their charitable interests. So that's sort of a broad overview of what we do. And then today I'm going to be talking quite a bit about the community report that we've been producing the last couple of years. For folks who might be tuning in for the first time or for a refresher about this report, is we've been doing a nonprofit survey at BCF since 2012. A lot of that was kept sort of internally and helped us try to sort of focus on the right areas in our grant making. But in the last couple of years, we have been producing a State of the Sector community report, which we're kind of switching to just being called the community report moving forward. It's a pretty broad overview of all the different areas, as we will talk about moving in this presentation today. So it has just a very brief overview of the nonprofit sector. You can see here that, well, I'll start with a broad overview that we all know that we have a very vibrant nonprofit sector on the island and beyond. It's a lot of the nonprofits play a very large role in sort of our high quality of life here, from arts and culture to human services. And while this vibrant sector still exists today, there are some challenges that they've been facing in the last couple of years, in particular the last year or two. So you can see here, when we ask the question, do you feel your salary and benefits package is sufficient in hiring and retaining qualified employees? 51% of those nonprofits said no, and 40% said yes, which is great, but that still means that more than 50% have concerns about hiring and retaining qualified employees. That's continuing to increase as the cost of living has been increasing on the island. And then the other piece of it is also having enough volunteers. Last year we had the survey, 57% of nonprofits said that they did not have enough volunteers for their needs. We just closed the survey this year, and that number has been going up, unfortunately. So we'll keep tracking that in the years to come. So big picture, while we have this wonderful nonprofit sector, there are some areas that are something we need to focus on as we continue to move forward here. So in our survey last year, we presented this community framework for the first time, and we created this framework based on a lot of research, looking at a variety of different types of community frameworks, one being the AARP, which I know Reed was working really closely on, the Livable Communities Index. And we looked at World Health Organization, we looked at other communities and frameworks that other communities and cities were using. And we came up with these 10, and we kind of floated the idea around nonprofits by doing peer reviews. We did some focus groups. And so we came up with these 10, and they are, someone will answer that. They are affordability, connection to place, connection to culture, economic opportunity, access to justice, health services, civic participation, education and learning opportunities, transportation, and respect and social inclusion. And so these are the 10 characteristics we're looking at for a sustainable and supportive community. And while they're kind of individual, and I'm going to talk through them, each of them, in sort of a brief overview, they're very intertwined. There's a lot of interconnectedness between them. So if one is doing well, it could have a positive impact on others. On the flip side, if one is not doing very well, it could have a negative impact on the other areas. So we put this together to kind of give a sense of where we're going with how we're looking at each of these areas. So before I get started on each of the characteristics, I wanted just to show how we've structured the slides to help people follow along. On the left-hand side, you can see that we have a rating, sort of red being negative, orange trending negative, yellow is trending positive, and green is positive. That's kind of looking at how is it going. If you look at the right-hand side, you can see we pulled data. So this report, the community report, has a lot of data on each of the pages. We pulled one area that we thought was really important to share and kind of helps give the big picture of what's happening. And then below, we have some of the interrelated areas. So areas that are impacting that characteristic, as well as areas that characteristic is impacting. And so I can talk about that very briefly. I won't spend a ton of time on that, but we can definitely go into more detail if people have questions about how they're all connecting with each other. So we'll start with affordability. Big picture, I mean, I think most of us know that this has become a real challenge on the island. It's in the red zone. As you can see to the right, we kind of pulled out in the report a variety of different statistics that really kind of help show why it's such a challenge. We've been tracking the cost of buying an average home on the island, and using the data that we found, the average price is a little over 1 million. Some sources actually put it quite a bit higher for 2023, but this is the number that we were using. And when you look at the detail of what it costs to actually be able to afford a $1 million home on the island, someone needs to have, or a family needs to be making about $225K to $240K with a 10% down payment. And that was at 6.46 interest rates when we wrote this report, and they've gone up since then. So this actually could be a little bit higher. Then when you look at the salaries of really important community members living on the island, those salaries are pretty much a fraction of what it costs in order to afford an average home here. And so that's sort of the big picture challenge that we're seeing in the community. Interrelated areas, I won't go into too much detail because I'm going to be talking about each of these, and I will be bringing up the affordability as we go through it, but that red is definitely having an impact on all of those listed below. And even though education and learning right now, for example, is in green, there's a chance that there's some risk that could start slipping into either yellow or orange as we see the affordability continue to be a challenge. Moving on to respect and social inclusion. So this is in the orange based on our research and our conversations with folks. We pulled out two of the more vulnerable groups that we wanted to share some data on, adolescents being one group. So when you look at the data, basically it's 20 to 25% of adolescents said no to the question that there are people in their neighborhood or community that they could talk to. So that's a quarter of adolescents said that they do not have someone that they can talk to when they need help. When we look at seniors, there were concerns with social engagement. That was 41% either said that they were somewhat concerned, or very concerned when they had to when we asked a question about whether they were concerned about social engagement, and that's from an IVC survey. Again, that has a lot of interrelated areas. That orange could have an impact on the areas, as you can see below. It's a pretty cross-cutting characteristic. Connection to place is in green, which is always lovely to see. We do know that when we look at the data, this is from the 2022 National Community Survey. It was positively rated by 96% of respondents, which is higher than national averages. That green can have a very positive impact on the interrelated areas. You can see below, there's a lot of data that shows that connection to place, being outdoors in nature, having access to green space can have a very positive impact on physical and mental health, for example. So there's a lot of reasons why we want to keep this in the green and maintain that momentum as we move forward. Health services was in the red zone. It was not rated so well in the National Community Survey. 24% of residents who answered the survey positively rated the availability of affordable quality health care, and 16% positively rated quality mental health care, which is the bottom 2% and 3% respectively of the national benchmark. And when we looked at other surveys, we saw that there was even a different answers between Bainbridge Island and Kitsap County. So there was a question about why folks were not accessing healthcare, and the answer that was most commonly answered was too long. It took too long to get an appointment. So Bainbridge Island, it was 52% answered that, compared to 44% in broader Kitsap County. You can see that. I mean, I notice it even in my daily life. When we're trying to access healthcare on the island, primary care is really the biggest concern, especially when Swedish shut down a couple of years ago, and a lot of patients lost access to primary care. It's been really hard to get that back, and that again ties back to affordability. There are a lot of folks who've tried to get another primary care office on the island, but haven't had a lot of trouble doing so because of the fact that primary care loses its profits when it actually often operates at a loss. And so on the island, it's even harder because of the cost of living here, as well as the fact that it's hard for people to find staff to fill up those clinics. So again, that does link back to affordability concerns. Education, we pulled data from this last year's enrollment because we only went up to 2022-23 in last year's report because that's the information we had at the time of writing it. We pulled the data from this last year, 2023 to 24. You can see that there's been a drop in enrollment again. That might not come to a surprise for those of us with children of school age, given there has been quite a large number of folks involved with the fact that BISD was probably going to have to shut down a school. There's been a $4.5 million budget cut due to the lower enrollment rates. And that is primarily, I mean, there's a lot of reasons for that, but primarily a reason is that a lot of families are moving away from the island, but due to affordability concerns. Connection to culture is in the green zone. This was rated very well across the board in a lot of the data we were looking at, but we did just want to share our experience with the arts, culture, and humanities groups. During COVID, they actually had a pretty steep decline in revenue due to a lot of folks putting their resources towards health, housing, and human services, and that was a nationwide issue. We jumped in 2020 to make sure that those arts, culture, and humanities groups were able to get some support during that time at a local level. And you can see that it's been, while we went down again in 2021, it's been steadily increasing over time due to just very innovative programs to try to make sure that the arts and culture sector stays alive on the island. Which is good. And we know that connection to culture also has a really positive impact on physical and mental health and all of the areas that you see below. Economic opportunity is in orange. We got this from the Chamber of Commerce site that 500 plus business community members generate nearly 8,000 local jobs. This is projected to grow by 20%. Over the next 20 years. The biggest challenges with businesses on the island is that it's very hard to open a business on the island, and it's also very hard to maintain the business and keep it going. There's a lot of reasons for that. One of them does tie back to affordability in the sense that it's hard to find staff to fill in those businesses. We're hearing from a lot of folks in the business community that they just cannot find the employment that they need. A lot of it's that people can't find affordable housing on the island to live close by, so they find jobs closer to home. We'll get to transportation in just a minute, but transportation does have a big role in that because as people move off the island and have to commute here, the traffic has been getting worse and worse on 305 for people to get here. So with that, actually, we'll just move on to transportation. This was from the National Community Survey. If you add these numbers together, 84% of respondents to that survey said that that improving the quality of the transportation system on Bainbridge Island was essential or very important. That's a pretty high number. We do know, again, like as I mentioned, 305 has become more and more congested as people move off the island and continue to work here. We are hearing that people are starting to find jobs closer to home once they move off the island. So that's a bit of a risk for folks who need the staff to continue to function here. We all know that the ferry system has been increasingly more challenging as well. And we are probably 5 to 7 years before we see any major changes in that. So there are some on both ends, both ferry system and 305, there are some challenges when it comes to transportation. And there are some challenges as well as just getting around the island itself. So work on transportation has a big impact on a lot of these areas, which I'd be happy to talk about more, but primarily having to do with staff. Access to justice. We did our own research on this. This was actually one that nonprofits told us to add in after we conducted the survey last year, because nonprofits working in these areas were saying that they were just seeing a huge spike in demand for access to justice. We looked at a variety of different nonprofits in the areas they were working and pulled their data to help us understand where the areas were increasing and what the increase in demand looked like. The one we pulled out here for just this purpose of this presentation is the landlord and tenant law. So a lot of disputes having to do with landlords needing their tenants to pay and tenants being unable to pay. Also an impact of COVID. And so you can see from 2020 to 2021, there was a 49% increase in requests. And then from 2021 to 2022, 150% increase in requests. So that's a pretty large jump from year to year. We're going to continue to track that. But that had a lot to do with the impact of COVID, sort of the economic instability for some families. And there was also a law that was passed in Washington State for a couple of years there that was helping tenants stay where they were. But that law has passed now. So we'll see if that continues to increase or if that will decline for that nonprofit in particular. Okay, so moving on to civic participation. This is last but definitely not least. We see this as a pretty cross-cutting area that is really important. We think that, you know, having strong civic participation will help us come to solutions in some of these areas that are in the red. Overall, when it comes to volunteer and voting, we are doing really well on Bainbridge Island. We have 6 out of 10 respondents say that they have volunteered their time to some group or activity. 9 out of 10 respondents voted in a local election. So when it comes to that area, we are doing really, really well. When we look at engaging in city affairs, it's less so. We have only 20% or 2 out of 10 respondents that have either elected an official to has either contacted an elected official to express an opinion or attended a public meeting or advocated for a local issue, cause, or a candidate. And that's pretty in line with nationwide numbers. I mean, we're not low compared to other communities, but with all of the resources and folks we have on the community and the challenges that we're facing, we really hope that will continue to go up so that more voices are heard in the community. Sometimes it is that, you know, we have a few loud voices and we want to make sure that we have everybody's voice is being heard in these areas. So that was a presentation for City Council. We don't need to go into what City Council should be doing, but that's essentially it for the report. I mean, we do this report every year in order to help educate folks in the community, both to hopefully promote civic engagement. I mean, we think that as folks learn about what the challenges and opportunities are, we hope that helps provide some incentive to get involved and do call your elected officials, but also get involved with nonprofits, serve on a board or volunteer your time. So happy to ask questions. I mean, answer any questions, or I'm sure there are some out there.
Yeah, I had a question, Dana, on the back on the education slide that you had. Yeah, is that the school district enrollment only, or did you go into the private schools too?
This is BISD only. This is public school.
Because that would be a lot higher with the there's a lot of private schools here.
There are a lot of private schools. I think we didn't include that because the private schools there are a lot of them, and that is part of the reason there's been a decline in enrollment. I think that there have been some folks going to private school. But why this number matters so much is that there are a lot of families that are attracted to the education system on Bainbridge because it has such a positive reputation. But as the numbers decline, the budget will decline with it. And so we need to track it closely to make sure that, you know, as those enrollment numbers are declining and understanding why they're declining, we need to be able to track sort of how it's affecting the quality education of our public schools. But it would be interesting to see the private school enrollment too, that's gone up.
Right, I think it's probably quite high.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I mean, sort of naturally, if funding is going down for public schools, then folks will be more interested in private schools, like the reputation of public schools will decline as funding declines. So
Mhm.
I assume.
Nope, I think you're right.
Dana, I love this. Every year, it's like, oh, give me all the data. Um, how do you, who do you distribute this to? How do you, who's your audience for the report? Who all gets to see it? And
Yeah, I mean, our audience is everyone, all of the above, everyone who's on this call. We do basically distribute it as far and as wide as we can. We've been doing a lot of these presentations since it came out in the fall of last year. So we tweak it as we learn from what is working and what's not working. But the big idea is it's to provide an education for the public. And we want to provide as much local data as possible. So when I'm doing the digging and the research, we do try to use as many local sources as we can to get a better understanding of what's happening here compared to other communities. So the audience is, it's for folks who want to make an impact in some way in the community and want to get involved so that they can understand how to sort of focus energy as we learn.
does anybody else on the call have any questions? Yeah, Jake.
Dana, is this, Ed and I usually go see this when you do it like up at the library or something for BCF folks.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a digital form that has the whole report? Because there's so much incredible data in there where you go into it in a lot of different categories that you obviously don't have time to cover here. And depending on who the audience is, different people are going to be interested in different things. But is there access somewhere to the whole report other than just the print version that you can get if you can get your hands on? That's great.
Yeah, we have it on our website. So I can send a link. Let me see if I can find it real quick.
I think I have access to that, but I don't know if everybody does.
If everybody does.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it would be great to distribute if folks, let me see if I can just find it and put it into the chat here. And maybe we can provide a link on the video as well,
Yeah.
so people can find it when they watch it. There is a lot more information. We could talk I could probably talk about the report for many hours. So, we wanted to just have a very, very high level overview, but I think if folks are interested in learning more, our report is a great way to dig deeper. And especially if there's an area that you are interested in particular, you can dive deeper into that. And then in the back of the report, there's a list of sources in the back. So if there's an area that you're particularly interested in, you want to dig deeper yourself, you can go and find the source and then get more information or contact us. I'm happy to talk about how we found the information and anything else I can provide you. And I would love to share also the fact that the back of the report has a list or a number of questions that if you're interested in talking about it with folks, these are questions that you can it's kind of like a book club type thing. If you wanted to talk about it with anyone else who's interested, there are some questions in the back.
Here we are talking from a senior center, and I guess my question, Dana, is, do you have it broken down, these categories broken down into a senior center, a senior population?
For each of the 10, you mean?
Yes.
We don't have it broken down by age for each of them, but we do have, we have looked, if you go to the respect and social inclusion piece, that there is some information on seniors, and the importance of ensuring access to all the services that nonprofits provide. In previous iterations of the report, we have had more information broken down by age, but not in this version is explicitly.
My other question would be, thank you for that. My other question has to be with what surprised you the most?
Very good question.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah, it's a really good question because and it's something that sort of seems to feel like it's ongoing because, we're just getting results back from this year's survey. And I'm finding similar patterns as last year's, but there are a couple of not surprises, but areas that I thought were slightly unexpected, I suppose, to be rated so that people are really concerned about some areas. I think for me, I knew health services was an issue on the island because I have personally experienced it. I didn't realize that it was so across the board. Everyone was having so much trouble with primary care. I think for me, that was, I wouldn't say a surprise, but I suppose helpful in understanding the context that it's a problem for everybody. And the concerns around that, as you dig deeper, it really does tie back to affordability. And so for me, understanding the complexities around why health services is a challenge was really fascinating and also concerning.
Well, and that certainly affects us seniors,
Yeah, for
to
sure.
a great degree.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things we've been hearing as we've been talking about each of these areas. We hear from nonprofits working with seniors and just the challenges around even just getting transportation to get the special services that might be needed in Seattle is really, really hard. To get enough volunteers to take folks over there if they need help, or just having it be so far away with an unreliable transportation system on top of it is just making it a multifaceted problem.
We're so fortunate to have IVC,
I know, they're wonderful.
Boy.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for all that information. That was fascinating.
Barbara, did you have your hand up?
I did. So I'm not sure I can frame this very well, but it has to do with respect and social inclusion. And I was really struck by the significant percentage of like high school students who didn't feel like they had people to talk to. And I was a little surprised at the percentage of seniors who didn't feel like they were connected enough. But that's because my filter is through the senior center, where there's connection happening all the time. So I find these two bits of information, at the opposite ends of the age spectrum, sort of troubling. And then, so when you identify these things, then what happens? We hope somebody in the community decides to make this their passion project, or, what's the next step after you provide this great info?
So very good question. We have heard from nonprofits that they use the data in their grant making. And so we hope that it helps with folks in their, when they request grants, to have actual data from a local level. But, the data we're pulling is from, the Healthy Youth survey for the adolescents. And then for the adults, or for the seniors, it was from IVC. But being able to have access to data from a report helps nonprofits make the argument that they need funding. And I think that's one of the main reasons to have it in there, is to highlight data that's available for folks to use. And, it is troubling. If you go into we had in our last year's report, we talked a bit more about the mental health of adolescents. And what I found interesting in particular in that analysis was that, adolescents and youth on the island have lower rates of depression compared to Washington State's, but higher rates of anxiety compared to the rest of Washington State. So when you actually look at it and compare our community with other communities, seeing what's different, I think is worth looking into. So we try to highlight that as well for nonprofits working in those areas, to say, there's a lot of data that can be dug into that helps kind of make the argument that their services are needed here.
Yeah, I
Interesting.
just kind of want to piggyback on Barbara's comment. In that, I mean, you started the presentation very accurately saying that Bainbridge has such a vibrant nonprofit sector. I mean, we really do. It's amazing. And then to see sort of where we're falling short is like, okay, so what? What can we do as nonprofits? And I'm not, maybe a report like this that gives sort of a cohesive understanding. One of the ways that we might address these issues is by working in concert with each other, all of these nonprofits, which I think that we are doing, but we can always improve to face
Yeah.
these challenges.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, while we look at sort of, the question around affordability, for example, we do have nonprofits that are working specifically on affordable housing, for example, but I do think every nonprofit that we work with provides, I shouldn't say all, but the vast majority, if not all, provide services in their programs at either a subsidized or free rate if needed. And that's an affordability, quality of life question, that people can access these programs and services for a very low price. And I think that's something that's particularly unique, that we have these nonprofits working in these areas and want to make it accessible for all. And I think that's a really special thing.
Yeah. Jake?
I think one of the dangers, it's always so tempting for organizations that do data collection and are in the community engagement service sector, people, to look at the data that shows your successes kind of above the line where it is working. So we like to look at that data. We like to look at where our successes are. We like to report the good news. But often, though, you look to see where the learning is and where the actions needed is what I think of as below the line data. And that's where it's not working. So obviously, there's a lot of information here. I mean, just listening to what Dana's hinting at, I just keep thinking, Mimi, there's a lot of places where the senior center obviously isn't getting to people. And there are a lot of people who are not the active, outgoing, engaged, in a lot of ways, party people sector of the old folks on the island, because it's we laugh, but it's true, Barbara.
Right.
There's a certain kind of senior, and the way when we're working on marketing and membership and we're looking at how we're marketing it, we're looking at all the great activities and all the fun things you can do. And it sounds like there are a whole lot of older folks on the island that aren't getting something really essential that they need. And I think it might be worthwhile having a conversation about that.
I do too. That really struck me in Dana's report as well, because I'm thinking, okay, the seniors who responded that they were not having their social needs met, my initial thought was they must not be members of the senior center. And maybe that's true. And we do love to party at Bisque, but we also have a lot of quiet, or introverts are welcome here too. There are many offerings that are not I don't know, I can't come up with another word besides party now that you said it.
Introverted activities are offered.
Well, yeah, and so I'm thinking maybe we're just not reaching those folks because
unless we acknowledge that it's not all roses for everybody, period. I mean, we're used to always putting on, because that's what people do, that we are looking at where we're successful. We're very, very successful, but we're not going to learn and make use of this data usefully if we don't acknowledge that there are places where it's not happening. And maybe it's not the senior center's role to make that happen, but it might be helpful. I'm thinking, listening to Dana talking about people having conversations from different nonprofits about where that sector, where those folks are not being reached and what we might be able to do. That's all.
Yeah, I will say, just sort of add to that, is that I witnessed firsthand last week. We just started a new Parkinson's support group, and I've noticed along with that, we also have a dementia and Alzheimer's support group, a grief support group, and those are sort of quieter offerings, but they are so well attended. They are meeting such a need. But maybe there are folks who don't know about them that really should know about them. So yeah, it's definitely food for thought.
Just looking at maybe asking a different question, and starting to find out where if there's data around that, maybe Dana can help us find some of that. Is where specifically, is there something about where it's not working that might help us?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have data around that specifically, but it's a good thing to understand, I think, how to reach people. I mean, my mind always goes to, because part of my job is communications and outreach. I mean, how do you reach the folks that you don't? How do you reach folks who might not know about what services are available? And I think that's always a challenge. I mean, mailings, all island mailers, as expensive as they are, can really increase turnout for various activities, especially if it's something like where people don't leave their home very much because they are not feeling well. Providing online platforms for people to come in and talk via Zoom because they may not want to leave their house or can't leave their house but want to participate. Having those kinds of options is huge. But I think, Barbara, this goes to your question earlier too, is just having these kinds of conversations. I think, to Jake's point, having the ability to understand where the gaps are and understanding where the gaps are and creating conversations. I mean, there's opportunities for partnerships with nonprofits. I mean, we have so many wonderful nonprofits that partner to make things better for community members. So I think there are opportunities to have conversations as nonprofits, but also as donors. I mean, if there is an area in which donors feel a particular passion, and there's always an opportunity to invest in a singular nonprofit, we have area of interest funds at BCF, which is basically an opportunity to have a pot of funding for a specific cause. So for example, we have the Youth Experience Support Fund, or the YES Fund, which is for students who might not be able to participate in extracurricular activities because they are not able to afford soccer shoes or a tennis racket or whatever the issue might be. This fund, if they apply for it through Helpline House or otherwise, we are able to give that funding to that individual through a nonprofit. So, and we have a number of area of interest funds like that are supposed to help fill a gap that is identified in the community. So it's for nonprofits to talk and group around that issue. It's for donors to maybe group around issues and give directly to a nonprofit, or perhaps participate in an area of interest fund. So there's a lot of ways that I think we could use the incredible resources we have here on the island, the intellectual property, but financial capital, all those things can make a huge difference if we just know what needs to be done.
Yeah, Barbara.
Do you have any, or does anybody here have an idea of what the cost is of an island-wide mailer?
I could tell you if I went through our financials. It's not cheap, but it's worth it it depends on how you do it. I mean, you can go through a newspaper, which is, you can put in an insert in one of the local newspapers that's distributed. We've done the Kitsap Sun in the past, and there's also the Bainbridge Review, 98110 version of that. And I'd be happy to send that pricing Mimi's way if there's interest.
Yeah. Well, why are there restrictions? Why am I thinking there are restrictions on island-wide mailers?
I don't know. So there's the island-wide mailer, which you would send out separately, and that's like its own entity that would be way more expensive than an insert in a newspaper.
Right.
So there might be it might be cost prohibitive to do an
Well, I'm
independent one, but the inserts are less cost prohibitive, and sometimes it gets thrown away with the trash because people take their
Yeah.
the middle of their newspaper and throw it out. But we find that we have had people tune into our work through that, so it is a good way to get the word out.
Yeah, Jake.
I'm also thinking, you need to look at who you're trying to get the information to. And in a lot of cases, some of the seniors, I think, who might not be engaged and connected might not be the people who are going to be reading the newspaper or looking at the mailer. It's complicated. Obviously, if it were easy, everybody wouldn't be struggling. That's a worthy question is the best. It's that question. How do you get the word out? So
yeah, no, I agree. I think it's worth continuing the conversation around that because it's an area that we've been talking about it for a couple of years. How do you reach the people who don't know how to reach them? How do you get their attention? And I think that's the challenge that many of us face, especially for those who really need the services,
And I don't want to be like all rainbows and unicorns over here, but there is something to be said for all of us on the call acting as ambassadors for this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's a small island still, I like to think, and word of mouth isn't completely lost. And we as nonprofit gurus or whatever you want to call us have a responsibility to reach out and make sure that everyone that we're talking to knows that there are services available that they can take advantage of and that they should take advantage of.
Yeah.
I'm thinking also having seeing who would be the advocates or conduits to the people we're trying to get to. It might be that there might be an issue getting to these specific people, but possibly a caregiver or a family member or a group of particular caregivers who might be able to, maybe there's somebody we haven't asked yet, who might we be able to talk to besides the people we're trying to reach, but somebody who may know kind of an interim in between connection somehow. And I was thinking caregivers may be
Yeah. And knowing that data came from an IVC survey and who their target and who they were asking the questions to is something that would be interesting too. Knowing that number came from IVC, they probably have quite a list of people who might want access to some sort of connection to the community, and that could be a starting point.
Yeah, and we do have a close relationship with IVC, so
you do. Yeah.
We're thinking about, yeah, obviously they're reaching the people who are answering the questions, so
there you go.
we solved it.
No, I think that's great, Mimi. I think that could be an easy conversation to facilitate. I don't know that the answers would be easy, but IVC is just down the street, so.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think that you're right. Maybe the answers aren't easy, but the conversation needs to continue. Yeah.
Well, I
Really,
wonder
we have Dana
I
to
wonder
thank.
I wonder what Katie would say to that.
Katie Auger,
Yeah, Katie O'Shea. See
should
what
we get
she
her on
was.
the line?
Well,
Yeah,
it's
that's
interesting. I meant to mention, I knew I had something in the back of my head too. And Mimi, we've talked about this a number of times in our communication meetings, but that the Bainbridge Island
Resource directory.
resource directory. I mean, thank you. I was about to say the services directory. Bird. I mean, I've started putting that in my newsletter, and I'm probably going to put it in all of my newsletters because it is such an incredible resource that I think is undershared in a lot of ways because it has this vast ability to really help people find the resources that they need, and it's only improved. I mean, I've spent some time on it recently compared to a couple of years ago, and they've been updating it, and so sometimes we have that, like, if we build it, they will come mentality, but I think we've really got to spread the word about it because the more people know it exists, the more that people will be able to find the services that they need. So yeah, we should continue to do that, Mimi.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. We put it,
You put it in
I'm
your
working on our newsletter right now, and it's on, the resources page. But again, it's like, I mean, we're sending that to our membership, who probably all know about it. But yeah, how can we? Because it's a phenomenal resource. I mean, collection of resources.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to start putting it. I did not have it in my newsletter previously because it wasn't quite where they wanted it to be. But every newsletter I send out now, it's going to be on there. And I think we could get other nonprofits to do the same. We've had a couple meetings about it and how to get the word out. So I think we need to just sort of remind folks to, like, put this at the bottom of your newsletter. Looking for resources, go to Bird.
I'm wondering too, it's a very inviting graphic image, the bird.
I know.
You're talking about using a newspaper to send the word out, of one of those little stickers on the front of the Sun that just has the bird info on it could be a really valuable place for some people to start. It's an inviting little image and something that people do. I think you do tend to notice those stickers, even though I curse them sometimes, but they get your attention.
Yeah. I know the fire department has been really excited about it and wanting to spread the word about it too. So maybe we should jump back on that, maybe at our next meeting.